All right, well, it's good to have you with us. Joining us now, he wants to crash the party. Former state senator, now member of Congress, just had to get in this conversation. Congressman, 5th District Republican Tom Garrett. Tom Garrett, good to have you with us. You're with Dave, Chap, and Ben, and me. Good to have you.
Look, I like reading stuff that Ben writes, but I don't know him that well. I was willing to do pretty much anything to have a chance to hang out with Chad Peterson and Dave Marsden. So, Frederick, you're just collateral damage as far as that goes, my friend. Anyway, so, we sat down with the governor yesterday, and I think they're doing the 66 toll meeting at 11 instead of earlier because they want to see if they can break that $40 number that they hit yesterday briefly.
Tom, you going to pay it?
I'm walking to work, my man. It's because of my commitment to the environment.
There you go.
That's right, committed. So let's just talk, Congressman, for a minute about Terry McAuliffe, his reign coming to an end in January. Chap, let's start with you. As you look back on McAuliffe's legacy, how do you see it now?
Well, it reminds me of the old saying, how do you view the French Revolution? It's too early to tell. I'm going to use the same for the McAuliffe administration. I mean, this is, I think, the 6th administration I've served under, and they all had different personalities. Ralph Northam's going to be a very different personality to Terry. I think you usually need to put some distance between it to kind of assess what the impact was on Virginia. In a lot of ways, Terry was a different kind of governor that we hadn't had before. A lot of the governors that came in, first of all, they made a show of bipartisanship and kind of being someone that could attract people across party lines. And a lot of that was because you ran as a Democrat in what was a Republican-leaning state. I think Terry was the first candidate that really didn't. He ran as a Democrat in a Democrat-leaning state, and so he didn't have the same sort of ethos of like a Mark Warner did, where you had to spend time down in the 9th District or the 5th District and kind of work your way back. In terms of kind of Terry's signature accomplishments, I think there was some legislation that he passed. I think the I-66 was a big deal. Now, there's pushback on the tolls right now, so that's a hot issue, and I'm glad we're talking about it because there are some pieces that are still missing as far as I'm concerned. One of the things we were promised was additional lanes inside the Beltway, which have yet to be opened, even though as I understand, the environmental permits have been issued. So I guess my point is, John, it's too early to tell. Terry's been a great advocate for the state. He's had a lot of enthusiasm for the state. In terms of how that impacted our economic numbers, I think, frankly, was marginal. Our economic numbers our growth has been slower than most states for reasons that have nothing to do with Terry McAuliffe or anybody else. It's sequestration.
But you got a lot of jobs here. Tom, I want to get you involved quickly, sitting in Congress, but obviously, serving the people of the 5th District in Virginia as McAuliffe leaves. You served, obviously, in the Senate when he came in. How do you view his legacy, Tom Garrett?
Well, honestly, I've never had somebody veto so many pieces of legislation that I was proud of and still been able to say that I actually enjoyed their company as Governor McAuliffe. I think, chaps, as usual, Peterson's really onto something as it relates to sort of his assertion that we need to give this a little bit of time and sort of see how the dust settles. But I will say that for somebody who adopted a state, and certainly Governor McAuliffe is a new Virginian, if you will, he really was a vociferous sort of advocate for Virginia, and I give him credit for that. I'll also say that to the extent that he was certainly overtly partisan, he was never difficult to work with, rude, or dismissive, and that certainly is the mark of someone who knows what they're doing. I could certainly criticize the governor, but the door was never closed, and the ears were never closed. Sometimes the mind might have been closed, but I'll tell you that if this question were about me and not him, you could probably say the same thing on some issues. I might take exception, but we do something well in Virginia, and the rest of the country could learn from it, and that is that Chad Peterson and Dave Marsden are my friends. We sat down at lunch yesterday with Governor-elect Northam. I sat next to Bobby Scott, who I've come to like a great deal. But every month in Virginia, we do a bicameral bipartisan lunch here in Washington where Senators Kane and Warner and all the members of the congressional delegation all sit down at a table There's no press, there's no anything, and people are able to get to know one another and sort of understand issues that are important to one another, and that creates a synergy. I also really miss the ability to sit in the same cloakroom as members of the party that I'm not a member of, and get to know about one's families. It's truly, with 435 members in the House, that does not happen nearly as well as it does with 40 members in the Virginia Senate, for obvious reasons and less obvious. We have two different rooms that we retire to, and so, it's only slowly and by dribs and drabs that we get to meet people across the aisle. Governor McAuliffe, I don't think, would have been somebody who let that happen, to his credit, and certainly doing a postmortem, I want to give credit where it's due.
Dave?
Terry McAuliffe, I don't know if anybody has ever worked as hard at what he was able to do, and I think he was kind of given a message pretty quickly that people weren't going to work with him on some issues that were important to him. And he threw himself into economic development like nobody's business. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a guy who I think he only sleeps 3-4 hours a night. He would spend all day at the office and come home, have dinner. He hit the phone with Asia at 10 o'clock at night and was on the phone with Asia till 2 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. Get 3 hours of sleep, get up, hit the gym, and hit the office, clapping his hands, ready to go. I mean, his enthusiasm was phenomenal, and he got hit like our next governor is going to be hit with the effects of sequestration. Mm-hmm. But what he did with his economic development, was it $15-16 billion, chap, that he's brought into the state? That has mitigated the loss of those sequestration dollars as Virginia cut back on federal spending, and which is about all that he could do, because you couldn't control that. But I think he's made Virginia an open and welcoming place. Major corporations all over the country, feel like Virginia is a place that they can come and that their employees will be welcome, whether they're LGBT, whether they're minority, whatever their religion is. Virginia's moving in that direction. I think that was pretty clear in this election that we just had, that Virginia is going to be a place of tolerance, and we're not going to tolerate anti-anything. And so we're on the right track in this Commonwealth. Terry McAuliffe has moved us in a very, very positive direction, and I have a great deal of confidence in my friend Ralph Northam that he will continue that in his own way. That we'll continue to move Virginia in the right direction.
Always on message.
Well, look,
was that a paid political announcement?
It was nice, really.
You got to put down the script now, Marston.
And it's not paid, but when you come right down to it, the man has done a great job.
I think he's been a great governor. I mean, that's why we call him Governor McGenius. I think he's been a great governor. He was right on Medicaid expansion. I was wrong. I've already admitted that. I'm now for it. You put a bill in. I'm 100% behind you. We got to get the money in the state. But if you look at what he's done, he's brought jobs in. He's been a relentless advocate, a salesman for Virginia. That's a good thing. That's a great thing. But then even beyond that, what has he done that has hurt business in Virginia or hurt development in Virginia or hurt anything in Virginia? He hasn't done anything, right? I can't find one thing he did. You say, well, that was bad or that hurt us. All he did was veto crazy Republican social legislation that, first of all, if there was a Republican governor, that stuff never would have gotten out of committee anyhow. It just got out because they knew McCullough was going to veto it, so he vetoed all that crazy stuff. If I could point to one mistake he made, and you have to really dig down, is he screwed up the deal with Colonial Downs. That pissed me off because we had a deal made, and he got involved in it, and he didn't understand it, and he screwed the whole thing up, and now it's gone, and we don't have a track. So, but other than that, I mean,
John, horse racing is on a downward trend. It's
on an upward trend. We got to get casino gambling done. Once we get that, it's a whole new game. Because if you go to MGM or you go to Dover Downs, like I do, or you go to that thing in Charleston there, just over the line, half the vehicles have Virginia plates. So hopefully now,
Fredericks,
that you got all these Democrats in, we're going to get casino gambling.
Are you all in the same room with him? What do they put in your coffee? I mean, I got to at some point chime in, and I want to be collegial because I love these guys. But at one point, I think I had the record for number of vetoes by the governor of one particular individual's bills, so I had to go to the federal level just to avoid that. Having said that, I think the most overtly social piece of legislation I've ever been the chief patron of in Virginia was the bill to allow anyone of age, regardless of sexual preference, not for pay and not in public, to sleep with anyone any way they wanted to because it was against the law. And I don't know how much more tolerant you get than that. So there was a lot of legislation that was getting vetoed that was along ideological lines that had nothing to do with social projects, like opportunities for young people in impoverished neighborhoods to vote with their feet and essentially get out of the failing school systems where the children aren't failing the schools, but the schools are failing them. And that sort of stuff was getting vetoed. And so I don't think that's a social experiment. I think that's about recognizing that an inherent right of an American is an opportunity. And so, you know, again, I consider the governor a friend, but I don't know what they've slipped in John's coffee. Maybe somebody can check. You know, as it relates to jobs, we are somewhere where we have not been in my adult lifetime in Virginia. I do think the governor threw himself into his work with a passion that was sincere. But I don't want to sit back here and candidly, I think Chap Peterson was far less biased in his statements than our fair radio host. But I want him to check your coffee, John, because it's early and it's midweek, and I just want you to take a deep breath before we crown King Terry and long for the good old days.
Vote I ever cast in my entire lifetime was for Ken Cuccinelli for governor, and my wife voted for McAuliffe. She told me I was an idiot at the day I went in there, and she was right. Worst vote I ever made. I think he's done a great job.
All right.
We can't know that. You can't know that because there was no Governor Cuccinelli. But I'll tell you this, I agree that the Republican Party, and I think my legislative record would indicate that, again, by virtue of the fact that we had the courage to carry the sodomy repeal in a time when everybody, including everybody in your studio, knew that it was stupid and draconian and archaic, and that it was beyond the scope of the role of government to dictate who slept with whom. I think that's ridiculous that the government has no right to tell people what they can and can't do when they're of age and with consent. But there was no Governor Cuccinelli, and I would have carried the same legislation had there been and dared him to veto it. I think it failed in 2006 when Patsy Tyser had a bill with the exact same language and then passed the Senate 40-0 and the House 100-0, sadly, in 2014, which is a commentary on just how many people think it's appropriate for the government to dictate to adults with consent what they do. But I don't think that changes or that sort of thing changes under Governor Cuccinelli, and the reality is we can't ever know. I can't believe I've got an interview where A, I agree with Chap more than I do Fredericks, and B, I've lost Fredericks. But anyway, that's why Virginia's fun.
Ben Tribbett wants to know how you're going to get reelected in 2018.
Yeah, especially with Linda Perriello taking a look at the 5th District race. I mean, I
know what? I might just not run. I mean, if Linda Perriello runs, it's a foregone conclusion that I definitely won't win.
Oh, come on, Tom. You're going to run. I
think we'll be all right. I mean, I think the number of Democrat dollars that have been spent trying to beat me right now is closed on 6 or 7 million, and we're 1, 2, 3. We're a bunch in O. So I'm going to come up here and do what I said I was going to do. I'm going to talk about empowering individuals and liberty. We've got an amazingly unique initiative that would allow young people to get out from underneath the dark cloud of student loan debt that we're unveiling with some pretty broad support. But, you know, my formula has always been tell people what you believe and then do what you said you were going to do, and you'll be all right.
Just talking, Congressman, about the tax bill on the last segment. I think you were listening before you called in, and I'd just like to get your reaction to, I know one of the big criticisms of the tax bill has been what it does with college students and their now inability to write off some of their expenses as college students. And I know you represent a large university, so you know, could you respond to that and what your sort of thoughts are on that?
Well, it's an honor to represent Longwood. No, I'm kidding. I represent several universities, and it is an honor to represent Longwood. But I'm not going to leave Longwood and Averett and Hampton-Sydney out, even though UVA is certainly a wonderful and dynamic school. What we're doing is creating an avenue that will empower individuals to make decisions for themselves. Number one, do you know what percentage of Americans itemize, Ben?
No.
Okay, less than a third. So less than a third of people itemize. That means less than a third of people take advantage of the deductions. Do you know what happens to the individual standard deduction under the tax bill?
Yeah, it doubles.
That's right, it doubles, and so too does the family standard deduction under the tax bill. Now, sitting on $55,000 worth of student loan debt myself, this is something that I've looked at very closely. So let's say that my standard deduction is $6,000 and it doubles to $12,700. And let's say that I was amongst the usually wealthiest, less than a third, who are itemizing, and I was saving $1,000 a year by virtue of student loan interest deduction. Okay, but let's say that I save $6,000 a year by virtue of the doubling of the standard deduction and lose the $1,000 a year. Have I had a $1,000 tax increase, or have I had a $5,000 tax cut? So what we've just done is actually told the truth, which has been elusive as it relates to the discussion on this tax bill. But I'm delighted that Ben brings these points out because it lets me make them. If your standard deduction doubles to $6,000 or to $12,000 or to $24,000, and you lose $1,000 of deduction, that's what happens when you simplify the code.
Right.
There are fewer deductions, but people get to keep more of their pay. So, we can run on this. Let's get this thing done. Let's put more money in people's pockets. Let's explore creative alternatives to make our Social Security system viable for a longer or for an infinite time.
Right.
And let people choose what they think is right for themselves, as opposed to what one legislator from the other side of the aisle told me in Washington. We were talking about student loan debt relief, saying, I'm not sure we can trust people to make good decisions for themselves. There's your fundamental difference in political philosophy. Is some folks believe that the government can make better decisions for people, and some people believe that people can make better decisions for themselves. I fall in the latter category.
Well, Tom, it's going to pass, Congressman Garrett. And
I wouldn't bet on it, but anyway.
My wife Ann spent a week doing a computer program on the Senate bill, and we ran like about 100 different scenarios of people earning between $30,000 and $100,000 and up to $156,000. Itemize, don't itemize. The majority of people that called in were going to get a savings, and some of it was in the $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 range. And it was just unbelievable, the misinformation that's out there.
Well, so what happens is they say, hey, they're taking away this deduction, which is true. When you simplify the code, that means you remove lines so that you get to the point where you can do your taxes on a postcard, which is mind-numbing. And by removing lines, yes, deductions go away, but we have doubled the standard deductions. And I don't know anybody that was getting $6,000, $7,000, $12,000 a year deduction on their student loan debt. They don't exist. Therefore, if the deduction you lose is smaller than the deduction you gain, you have a net tax cut, and that's simplification. But you don't get that story told, and it's mind-numbing, because I know people like Dave Marsden and Chap Peterson simply wouldn't operate in a world where they ignored one part of the truth to accentuate another part of the truth in order to tell a narrative that wasn't accurate in the macro.
It's very simple. It's very simple, Congressman. The Democrats are frightened to death that this thing is going to pass, because if it does, they know, along with Trump's immigration restriction policies and his mission of deregulation, the economy is going to grow at over 4%. Jobs are going to come back. Wages are going to go up. People are going to see the tax increase in their pocket.
Well, I know I'm interrupted. I'm getting feisty this morning. We don't even have to use the word gonna. I mean, we've seen back-to-back plus 3% GDP quarterly growth for the first time since a guy named Bush was in the White House. I hadn't heard anybody talking about a new normal now that we're breaking 3% GDP 2 times in a row, which, again, hasn't happened since the 2000 in single digits. So the growth is already there. We've done 16 times more regulatory reform in 1 year than we did in the previous 25 as it relates to CRAs, Congressional Review Act.
Can I just make one?
Dave and Ben want the final word. Ben and then Dave.
Okay. I just was going to say, Congressman, the point is that deductions may have gone up, but in addition, the tax bill is also no longer allowing student loan deductions at the same amount, and it also
take the deductions,
graduate students,
less than 1/3 itemized, and the student loan deductions average about 1/5 of what the increase in the standard deduction is.
Hang on, but wait.
You get
but graduates,
take $1,000, you still got $5,000.
But Congressman, graduate students are now required to pay income, but you're now taxing graduate students that go to school tuition free. Their tuition that's waived is considered taxable income now. So you're actually taxing
you're saying that an education at the University of Virginia doesn't have value. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying it was waived the tax free. I mean, do you think that students at UVA should be taxed for getting their tuition waived?
Usually work. I think it has great value.
You're doubling the deduction, so the whole thing is moot. Look, I got to take off. If you're single in college, you're going to get a $12,000 deduction. The first $12,000 you make is not taxed. Dave, final word. We got to go.
Final word here is what happened to the folks who went to Congress to deal with the national debt, and this bill is projected to do about $1.5 trillion.
The Democrats are now complaining about the national debt. I got to cut you off.
That's
an insane argument.
It's an insane argument when it's being proposed by Republicans.
Now they're complaining about the debt after Obama's debt went from $8 trillion to $20 trillion. Now they're concerned about
he had to do it. George Bush didn't have to do it.
About the new normal and how this country just can't grow and create jobs anymore. That it worked for Kennedy, who I don't think was a Republican, although he would be today, and it worked for Reagan. It's going to work now if we don't mess this up. What scares me is you got 51 Republican senators right now who have the ability to extort whatever extra thing they want when we pull this thing out of conference. That's why I'm not even sure it's going to happen.
I got to go. I want to thank Tom Garrett for being with us. More information, garrett.house.gov. We'll be right back. The boys back in town, but also in charge.